Something telling me there's going to be a lot of bannings in the coming weeks. Honestly, the further the start date from the violence is, from like every day that passes, the amount of people that are going to be interacting with these streams, the amount of people that's going to be talking about this are going to decrease until you get to what we have probably right now with Ukraine levels. I mean, it all depends on the politics and what's happening on the ground. But generally speaking, that's how these news stories, that's how these wars go. And that's how social media treats them. So give it some time. We ban enough people and it shouldn't be a problem given like a week or two. Every once in a while I have somebody come in, but it shouldn't be that a big problem after some time. Why is Dylan not live on YouTube? Because I have an exclusivity contract with Twitch. Because I signed a contract with the devil. I mean, with Twitch.com and Jeff Bezos. A lot of cringe takes from the far left and far right on Israel-Hamas conflict. It's insane. Yep. I think a lot of it comes from people just being in echo chambers. Because if you're on Twitter, and at first I thought, like, this can't be possible. Because I'm seeing violence of all types in my feed. But if you are just liking posts that are like condemning the attacks in southern Israel, and you're just liking posts that are talking about that, the algorithm and the way it works is these channels are just going to serve you more of what you're liking and not serve you what you're not interacting with, which could be posts highlighting the destruction of Palestinian homes and lives. Same thing, vice versa. And so once you get into those bubbles and you've just seen thousands or hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos of stories of Israelis being murdered and taken captured, or the reverse of Palestinians having their homes caved in, and you just see that, and you see none of the other side of this violence, it's going to be hard for you to relate to the feeling of fear that a lot of Israelis have right now, or a lot of the fear that Palestinians have right now. The conversation is going to get unbelievably toxic because it's going to be hard for you to understand how anybody could be on the other side of this conflict, or how anybody could be even talking about. And that's the thing that really gets me, even talking about the violence on the other side of the conflict. That's the stuff that really gets me. That's when you know somebody's really far gone, is when they get angry when you just mention a war crime, or mention an atrocity, or mention the human travesty. That's when you know that somebody's just a locked-in partisan and they're not going to be pushed this way or the other way. I mean, if I reacted to a Ukrainian military operation that killed 800 to 1,000 Russian civilians in Crimea, or not even in Crimea, just in anywhere in Russia, not saying Crimea is a part of Russia, but anywhere that is internationally recognized as Russia, if I came out and I started endorsing that, the only explanation for how I could ever get to a point like that is that I've been in such an echo chamber and my mind has been so rotted just by pages and pages and pages and pages of stuff that made me every single day hate Russia more than yesterday but less than tomorrow. That's the only way I could come to that conclusion. Because if you corner any of these people and you say, you know, if you apply the standard equally, that means the Israelis would have a right to kidnap this person or to murder this person, or let's talk about this in other wars. Does this mean that Ukrainians can take Russian settlers hostage in Crimea, or Russians hostage in anywhere in Russia, bring them back to Ukraine, and then say you bomb any more Ukrainian cities and we're going to kill them all? Just going through Russian villages and like burning down random homes, is that helpful? No, it didn't help anything, and I'd have no reason to endorse it outside of either just like open bigotry, or again, like my mind has just been rotted by the echo chamber. Wait, we can't? That's the thing also. The Ukrainians can't do that. It's the only war I think somebody that I can pull out of. What, want me to use a different conflict? For example, the rebels in Myanmar. If the rebels in Myanmar went into some area that generally supported the government and killed like 1,000 people, I don't have to endorse that as somebody who supports the people of Myanmar's right to rebel against the junta. It's not hard to say that. The only reason you wouldn't is because you have an agenda in making sure that your side is never portrayed in a negative light ever, and so you just deny. It's dishonest, and it means that you don't really care about the truth. You don't really care about the suffering of human beings. You only care about the suffering of your side alone, And as much suffering as is caused to other sides of any conflict, you just don't give a fuck. But even from that perspective, I think it's terrible. Even that perspective, I think, is doesn't make sense. Because even if you're just prioritizing your own lives, going out and massacring Israelis, what are the Israelis going to do in response? Are they going to sit on their hands, go like, oh, it's the burden of God's chosen people. Oh, oof, phew, I can't deal with it. I guess we all give up and leave. No, that's not what's going to happen. They're going to engage in a brutal bombing campaign, and that's definitely Netanyahu's government. You think Ben Gvir is going to tell Netanyahu, go a little easy on them? No, it's going to be a brutal bombing campaign. They're cutting off the water. They're cutting off the electricity. Now more civilians are going to be dead. And by the end of it, most likely more Palestinians will be dead than Israelis. And that will be the achievement that Hamas created by massacring Israelis, is making that more politically acceptable. I mean, millions of people in the world are being introduced to this conflict for the first time. That's always how this happens. It happened with the war in Ukraine. Millions of people around the world didn't know about what happened in 2014, didn't know about the long Ukrainian history of resistance, the history of the colonization of Ukraine and its language, its literature, its artists, its everything. How the Russians tried to hijack like Taras Shevchenko and all these other Ukrainian artists and people. And then in 2020, they found out about it for the first time. And Ukrainians, I would say, were generally good ambassadors for their culture and their people, and they did pretty well in trying to get the international community behind them. Just to be blunt, videos of you massacring grandmas on their kitchen floors, not dragging anybody new to the cause, not rallying international support behind you, and achieving nothing. So right now, there is a lot of fear that the Israeli military is going to move troops into the Gaza Strip, which will probably lead into a massive continued escalation in violence, as the Gaza Strip is an extremely dense area of 2.2 million people, the vast majority of which have not really any to many options to get out of the Gaza Strip, which has now been cut off from water, electricity, and supplies, which Israel has cut off into the Gaza Strip. And since there's a naval blockade, it's extremely difficult to cross the border into Egypt, and the Israelis control the other two parts of the border, the other two sides of the Gaza Strip. There's not a lot of options for the Palestinians in Gaza, who are fearing the pushing of Israeli tanks into their communities, the bombardments that are going to come with it, and the bombardments that are already underway. And the more bodies that are recovered in southern Israel, as the death toll for the Hamas terror attack in the south of the country, which saw elderly people killed on the kitchen floors, civilians kidnapped, massacres in kibbutz and residential neighborhoods, 260 people killed at a rave, foreigners like Thai migrant workers, Americans, Germans, all sorts of people taken hostage, horrible atrocities all across the south of the country. The more that gets uncovered, in my mind, when I see that, I'm thinking a few things. The first thing I'm thinking is, number one, what a horrific atrocity, what a disgusting, terrible thing to happen to southern Israel, to happen to the people of Israel. And then I think about the immediate reaction after 9/11 in the United States. I am very fearful that in the fervor of how we need to be strong and tough, how we need to respond and get revenge on these people, it's going to lead to an invasion of the Gaza Strip and a wave of violence that could be completely unnecessary, leading to the execution of the prisoners, many of them not just Israeli, but American, German, and from other countries around the world as well. A brutal urban compact campaign that who knows whether it's going to be successful or not. The fact that the Israeli military didn't know that this was going to happen, that Netanyahu's government and the Mossad was unable to pick up on the scale of this attack, which just in the first day fired more rockets, that is Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas fired more rockets at Israel in one day than the entirety of the 2014 war. Do you guys think they didn't plan for if Israel moves in to Gaza? And it's not just going to be Hamas. People forget Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad both fired the rockets. So they're not just going to be fighting the 15 to 30 to 40,000 Hamas fighters that are in the Gaza Strip. They're going to be fighting Palestinian Islamic Jihad too. And Hezbollah has declared that if Israel does move into the Gaza Strip, that they're going to intensify the bombardment, which is already going on near the border, as the Israeli military and Hezbollah are scuffling. And Israel is bombing Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is bombing Israel. In fact, right now, you can already see Hezbollah doing strikes on Israeli armor on the border. Here is one of them striking. Here's Hezbollah soldiers using an anti-tank guided missile to strike a IDF M113 infantry fighting vehicle. These are the same things we used in Vietnam. It's a pretty old infantry fighting vehicle. The Ukrainians actually use it too to transport troops and get the wounded out. Here is it getting struck by Hezbollah anti-tank guided missiles on the border with Israel in southern Lebanon. Okay, you know, I watch a lot of Ukrainian war footage, and I always hated the music. I always hated all all the techno screeching and all of that. But the silence of this Hezbollah video makes me wish that we had some like Bayraktar or like something. Dude, Hezbollah has music. There's no way Hezbollah doesn't have music. Okay, all organizations in the middle, all militias and groups like that, they have something. They have some tune. They play something. It's just unnerving. I feel like something that was made by an Ascent account, not an Iranian-backed militant group. Like, this isn't like the Taliban. They're not like banning music. I don't know why they look. This is taking so while to load. There we go. It really drags on. Hezbollah really does have war. My point is it's not just Israel fighting Hamas like they just did over the last few days, and they have killed a lot of the militants that crossed over the border and did all this terrorism. They're going to have to go through extremely dense communities to fight Hamas. 15, I mean, it depends on what numbers you trust. I've heard NATO generals talk about 15 to 20,000. Israel says they have 30,000. Hamas itself says they have 40,000. So we're talking about a range of 15 to 40,000 soldiers. Over the ones that were already killed in southern Israel, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters, Hezbollah, and all these groups are almost certainly going to be supported by Iran with money and guns and ammunition. And there'll probably be other fighters from around the world, other groups that don't like Israel that are going to flood into the region. In fact, I saw the Syrian Social National Party. I forget their exact name, but they're basically like Syrian Nazis that fight for the Assad regime. They have already said that they've moved into southern Lebanon to prepare for this scenario if Israel moves into the Gaza Strip. Now, that doesn't mean Israel still can't try. They've called up over 300,000 reservists, and obviously 300,000 is a lot bigger than even the highest Hamas estimate of 40,000, but it's a lot easier to be the defender than to be the attacker. Now, that isn't always the case. Of course, air power is going to change that. But what I'm saying is you dig into a position and you hold tunnels that you've dug up and built up over decades. Like, Hamas isn't unprepared for this type of scenario. Hamas has been preparing for decades. Palestinian Islamic Jihad has been preparing for decades. Hezbollah has been preparing for a very long time. So I think a lot of people in their mind, they're like, but Israel has the Air Force. Israel has, they have nuclear weapons. They're stronger. I mean, the United States was stronger than the Taliban. And we do not control Afghanistan. And Ashraf Ghani had to flee the country with suitcases full of money. And so I want whatever decision is made in Tel Aviv about what to go for, how to go forward with this war, for it to be rational and acknowledge the situation at hand here, acknowledge the pressure cooker that created this violence in the first place, bring the people engaged in terrorism to justice. All the people that were captured and killed or brought to justice in southern Israel that were engaging in this terrorism, like, they deserve to be brought to justice. But is a war between Israel, Hezbollah, the Syrian Social National Party, they're going to be a small faction, but they're still going to be fighting, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas, all with Iran dumping weapons into the region, possibly with us also, and responded by dumping weapons in the region? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to be good for the region. I don't think it's going to be good for the stability of the region. What would you say to somebody who would just say, okay, Hamas will, even if Israel successfully clears out the Gaza Strip, because if Netanyahu commits to this type of an operation, he's going to have to commit to this type of an operation. What if Hamas just goes into exile again? And again, these two wars are not perfectly comparable, but the Taliban went into exile into Pakistan, rebuilt, got fighters, put little children in extremely radical schools, fed them, clothed them, radicalized them, then marched back into Afghanistan, fought the ANA, thrashed the ANA, took over 1/3 of the country after being on the brink of destruction, and now have taken over the whole country. And have sent it into probably decades or who knows how long of a period of repression. So whatever decision is made, I don't want it to be like Howard Stern-ass logic. You get what I'm saying? I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. I'm not trying to make excuses for what happened. I'm just saying that the decision that should be made should be what saves the most lives, preserves long-term security, and should not be made rashly. Or for the personal political reasons that Netanyahu might have for engaging this type of an operation. Anyway, I'm fearful of that response. So that's the first thing. I don't want a rash response. I'm also fearful that Netanyahu's personal political survival could be a top consideration for the decision makers. The coalition, the far-right coalition survival could be a top priority for the decision makers, definitely after they failed to protect Israel. And so I have a feeling that the Israeli government might over-respond in order to try to protect their political image after failing to protect over 1,000 Israelis. That is something that I am fearful of. That is something I'm legitimately fearful of. Now, I've talked to other people who think that, Netanyahu won't do it because it's suicide. There's no way the invasion would work. There's no way the operation would work. It would grind on and on and on and be a disaster, end up killing more Israelis, getting more IDF soldiers killed. But I don't know if Netanyahu is thinking that way. I think, there's been many people who believe that they can fight wars that they wouldn't be able to win in the long run, fight fruitless struggles for pride, for political survival, or any other number of reasons. Brezhnev in Afghanistan, I guess, would be an example as they fought the Soviet-Afghan War. The United States in the later years of the Vietnam War, our later years and part of the Afghan War, the war in Afghanistan under the Trump administration as he increased drone strikes. Netanyahu was done. Most Israelis blame him. That's the thing. If you look at the top Israeli newspapers, I'm not just making this up, they share a similar sentiment. They are blaming him and blaming his government and these conflicts that they've had with the IDF and Israeli soldiers as part of the reason why they were so unprepared for this response. And the fact that this was so large, coordinated between Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas, firing so many rockets, and they were just completely unprepared. That they weren't able to pick this up with the Mossad. It was a failure, because Netanyahu's whole selling point, and this is what scares me the most, because this is what he was elected on, and that's why I think he might just roll the dice and see how it goes, is he was elected on the idea that, hey, again, I've said this before, he's not maybe the best on the economy, he's maybe not the best on social issues, he might not be the best on the Supreme Court, he might not be the best on democracy, he might not be the best on corruption, but man, does he keep Israel safe, the Iranians at bay, and he keeps the Palestinians in line. He keeps us safe. That would be, I guess one of the more die-hard Netanyahu supporters, that would be their sentiment. But now over 5,500 rockets have flown over the border in just 24 hours. Now we have over 1,000 dead Israelis, unprecedented attack on Israel. That image of Netanyahu is actively falling apart. The thing that kept his image up above water after all the corruption scandals, after all the protests against him with the Supreme Court, the thing that still motivated voters to come out and support him, the thing that would motivate some of the more extreme right-wing figures and voters in the country to come out and support the coalition around him and the other parties that made a coalition with him, that image is falling apart actively. And so if he negotiates, gets the prisoners out, his political career is over, in my opinion, either way. But he might be under the assumption that if he goes in there and cleans house, rolls the dice, sees how it goes, then maybe he'll be able to recover that image, and he'll be the great crusader. He'll be the war hero. He'll be Churchill. He'll be FDR. He'll be, the liberator. Or whatever. I don't mean, whatever they'd call him. That's what scares me. Because I don't trust Netanyahu to be very rational when it comes to calculating the risks here and calculating the human cost. He's never cared about the human cost, particularly, especially the human cost in Gaza. He's 100% under that opinion, and Gaza is going to be running red with blood. I'm not so sure, because it's already bad for Netanyahu as it is. If he invades the Gaza Strip and this whole thing fails, or it spirals out of more control and then more Israelis die, and he was unprepared for the war that he launches, and so not only was he unprepared for this terror attack, but then unprepared for the war, this isn't Russia. You can't just shut down all the press and arrest literally every critic. As much as there are many different problems in Israel, the Israeli press can criticize Netanyahu. He can't just tell them to stop and just cover it all up. That's not an option for him. And so if he follows one failure with an even more dramatic failure, he's going to deliver the Israeli right one of the worst electoral and just strategic victories for the country in decades. That victory's losses. Now, I'm not going to be the one to tell you guys whether or not such an operation would be successful, and how successful it would be in neutralizing Hamas, or if they'd be able to really pull it off, if all the parties that are saying they're going to get involved and Iran starts funneling weapons. I can't tell you, because I'm not a general. I'm not, a soldier has experience in the region. I've never reported in the region. I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is I don't think Netanyahu is the best person to judge the situation. I do not think that. I do not think that at all. And I do not think that Hamas's threats to execute the civilians that they captured are a empty promise. Netanyahu knew about the attack. I don't know if we know this for sure. This is an Egyptian intelligence official. We don't know this for sure. This was reported a day ago, but this is an Egyptian intelligence official. I would want more than Egyptian officials. Mounting questions over Israel's massive intelligence failure to anticipate and prepare for a surprise Hamas assault were compounded Monday when Egyptian intelligence officials said that Jerusalem had ignored repeated warnings that the Gaza-based terror group was planning something big, which included an apparent direct notice from Cairo's intelligence minister to the prime minister. The Egyptian official said Egypt, which often serves as a mediator between Israel and Hamas, had spoken repeatedly with Israelis about something big without elaborating. He said Israeli officials were focused on the West Bank and played down the threat from Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government is made up of supporters of the West Bank settlers who have demanded a security crackdown there in the face of rising tides of violence over the last 18 months. This doesn't necessarily mean that Netanyahu knew that this attack was going to happen. This could mean that his government was warned of this and they just ignored it because they didn't think it was a credible threat. And that would still be a failure that they should be dragged through the mud over. But that's very different than Netanyahu knew and did nothing. Because if you say Netanyahu knew and did nothing, that implies that he allowed the terrorists to enter his country, kill everyone, so he could then say, okay, now we can go kill the Palestinians. That would be the only it's not a logical thing to do, period. But that would be the only place my brain could travel down to understand why he would do that. And that would be absolutely insane. And again, from what we can see, the two groups that Israelis despise right now in relation to this attack is Hamas, the people who went in and killed everybody, and Netanyahu's coalition. And Netanyahu, specifically Netanyahu, is getting the most hate because of his failure to protect from Group A, the terrorists. So if his purpose was to save himself politically or start another wave of violence. He might have been able to start another wave of violence, but in the process, he's shot himself politically. He just did that to boost his popularity and get his dream to annex Gaza, but his popularity is not through the roof. It's not good. Not protecting your citizens is not a good look. If under Joe Biden, there was an attack on the United States that had 1,000 people killed, especially if we were getting warnings in advance that something was coming, something big was coming, whether it be 1,000 people, 9,000 people, 10,000 people, that was not something that's going to help the image of Joe Biden. He was already a dead duck, so this can only help. That's like saying J6 can only help Trump because his popularity is already shit. No, it didn't. It hurt him more. You can always go lower. If you don't think you can always go lower, look at Bush's approval rating when he left the White House. You can always go lower. It helped Bush. We will have to wait to see exactly what the Israeli intelligence failures was that created the situation before we can, I think, make those comparisons. That's the first thing. The second thing I would also say is the United States wasn't actively agitating and occupying the territory involved that motivated these people to go and do these attacks. So I think the political reality of why people know that the attackers are attacking is very different. If you ask Americans why we were attacked on 9/11, how many of them have actually read Osama bin Laden's statement or speech about all the reasons why they did the attack? If you ask most Americans, they'd be like, they fucking hate America. They fucking hate America. You ask Israelis, it's not that simple. I mean, they're in the region. They understand, I think, more deeply as to why these attacks are happening. The agitation that Netanyahu's government engaged in. And that's why the Israeli press right now is tearing Netanyahu apart. Also, the good point, Bush was barely 1 year into office when 9/11 happened. A year into office is a lot different than a decade in office, when the security policies in place are the ones you implemented, you brought about, you wanted to get passed. You've created the security structure that has failed. Or you at least controlled for a decade the security structure that failed. Bush was in office for a year. Anyway, if you look at any of the Skyline videos, any of these things, whether from earlier today or during the nighttime, you can see bombardments. I don't want to spend too much time just looking and waiting for bombardments. I don't think it's worth it. But at any point, if you tune in and you wait long enough, you will see a bomb go off. The bombardment of Gaza has been unbelievably brutal. Here are some images posted by United 24 Media of the Gaza Strip and some buildings that were demolished and bombed out by the Israeli Air Force. These buildings no longer exist. They've been demolished from that top floor to the ground floor. This is the only image. We got one more here. The ones that are standing are half collapsed. All the windows and walls blown out. Impossible for even if anybody survived these explosions, or like say you weren't there, you're at the store and you got lucky, you were with family, or you were pulled out of the rubble. And you weren't one of those who were either died in the initial explosion, was crushed by rubble, or suffocated. You've lost your home. You've lost everything. And let me just say, the people in Gaza are not a particularly wealthy people with an unemployment rate of 44%. It is not going to be easy to get more housing. There's already been over 100,000 to, I think, 130,000 Gazans that have been displaced out of a population of 2.2 million. And they've got really not anywhere to go. They don't got anywhere to go. And the more buildings you destroy, where are they going to move into? This is at the same time people are talking about cutting off aid into Gaza. That water and electricity and fuel, the fuel that could be used to power generators and electricity used to power hospitals, these are all being cut off. So these people have been displaced. Their support structures have been cut. And there's international calls for the cutting of aid to NGOs and to groups that could help these displaced people while also they can't leave. The describing of the Gaza Strip as an open-air prison is absolutely accurate. I see people critique that description. I think it's accurate. I think it's 100% accurate.